Cold Case, an Angelica Dale Mystery by P.K. Armstrong. Chapter 30. I had called ahead, and Susanna Rogers had invited me to meet her at the Osgood Library where she volunteered. Christopher offered to come with me, but I wasn't sure about Susanna's grief and thought she might be more comfortable with one person. After spending the rest of the day around Osgood with Christopher and Violet, I left them building a snowman in between snowball fights and drove myself to the library. The sky had opened the evening before, masking the landscape with flakes. The sides of the roads were lined with frozen mountains of snow where it was pushed aside by the plows. It was still falling, and the streets were becoming slushy. I arrived at the library and eagerly went in. One of my favorite things to do was spend cozy hours wrapped up in the library, especially on a rainy or snowy day. The building was warm and toasty, and between the snow and the books, I felt like I was wrapped in a protective cocoon. I walked through the automatic doors, and as they closed behind me, I took a deep breath and smiled slowly at the smell of damp old books and furniture polish. Osgood had not yet replaced their wooden shelves with the metal ones of more modern libraries. I made my way to the circulation desk as instructed and asked for Susanna. The room I was directed to had 4 tables set up, only 2 were occupied. All the room's occupants looked up as I entered the room and smiled agreeably. Angel? Bailey's mother, Susanna, had an engaging smile. Her brown skin gave her the appearance of someone much younger, smooth, and no wrinkles. But it was her eyes that grabbed hold of me, drawing me in, compelling me to know the source of her strength. I smiled back. Yes? I glanced at the other table where a young man was seated by himself, while Susanna helped the woman who sat before her. Did you want me to wait in the library? I asked, not wanting to intrude. Susanna shook her head and pointed to the other table. Would you mind? She asked hesitantly. Of course not, I said. I spent time each week with the literacy program in Fillmore. Hi, I'm Angel. I extended my hand to the young man. Justin, he replied shyly. What are you working on? I asked forthrightly. When working with adults who wanted to improve their reading, the motivation behind the effort was rarely just because. My reading and comprehension have to be better for me to get a promotion at work, he said proudly. Nice. What kind of work do you do? Machinist. Ah, important to understand specifications, I agreed. He nodded enthusiastically, and I sat down in front of him. Let's get to it, I encouraged. We worked together for the next 45 minutes, Justin gaining more confidence as he warmed to his words and to me. After he finished practicing, I had him write down in his notebook a few fiction novels that I thought might interest him and encourage him to read more. Susanna nodded her approval and dismissed her students. Thanks for helping, Susanna said with a big grin. My student was new, and the first few visits are a little more extensive. It was nice to have someone to help Justin so his progress didn't suffer. She gestured to some chairs and we sat down. Susanna pulled out some small plates and mugs and reusable containers with scones and fruit. I watched in surprise as she set out 3 plates and 3 cups. She reached for her thermos and then looked over at me, registering my surprise. Sorry, I hope you don't mind, but when you called and said you wanted to talk about the fire, I called Tony. He is meeting us here. Tony? I said, puzzled. Maybe her attorney? Tony Rowe, Corey's father. Oh, wow. I was truly taken off guard. I had numbers for him, but they were disconnected. I planned on digging into it later to locate his current information. Thank you so much. I paused. It's okay, isn't it? I mean, if it's going to upset him, my voice trailed off. Oh, no, no, it's fine, Susanna rushed to reassure me. Tony and I have made our peace. As much as a parent could when it comes to the death of a child, I shook my head sadly. Susanna nodded. Yes, that's it, isn't it? Doing what you can. I can't bring Bailey back. I miss her and what could have been. So I've just had to find ways to keep myself busy, help others, and honor Bailey's memory. Tony helped me with that. The door opened and a tall, good-looking man walked in. He was thin, dressed well in slacks, an untucked shirt, and a sport coat. He was a man who took care of himself, evidenced by the trim of his salt and pepper hair and beard, and his polished shoes. Susanna stood and walked briskly over to meet him, taking both of his hands into hers. Tony bent his 6'5" frame down to kiss Susanna on the cheek and said hello in a deep, velvety voice. Susanna kept one of his hands and led him over to me. They both had smiles on their faces. Tony, this is Angelica Dale. Angel, Tony. She made the introductions. We shook hands firmly, and Tony waited until Susanna and I sat down before seating himself. He declined food but accepted tea and relaxed back into his chair and looked at me expectantly. I appreciate you both for meeting with me, I began. I will be open with you. I was asked to look at the fire at the Aspen Club to see if I could find something to clear Stormie Gyles. Technically, according to the laws of this country, she has already been cleared, Tony said matter-of-factly. Declared not guilty, but not exonerated. I don't think the investigation and subsequent trial answered some really important questions, I replied. Like what? Susanna had a bland look of interest. I don't think she was expecting much. First, it's about motive. Who would have had a motive to kill the entire staff of the Aspen Club? Would Stormie, or anyone else for that matter, really set that fire knowing the others were in the club? I watched Susanna and Tony's faces. I had piqued their interest. And how did the culprit subdue so many people? There had to be more than one suspect, and if Stormie was one of them, who was the other? Tony and Susanna looked at each other and then looked back at me. I have a theory about what happened that dreadful day, and I am hoping if you are able to answer some questions about your kids and their habits, we can put some of the smaller pieces of this puzzle together. They both nodded, and I continued. Susanna, tell me about Bailey. Tony took one of Susanna's hands into his own for support. Susanna smiled. Bailey was a bubbly young girl, very trusting. She wanted everyone to be as happy as she was. She was a cheerleader at school, usually went out with friends, but was shy when it came to boys. She had crushes, but no particular boyfriends. She was beautiful, innocent, and she loved her little sister. I thought for a second. So when the investigation concluded that Derek and Bailey were having an affair, you never believed it? Susanna shook her head. No, not even once. I turned slightly and looked at Tony. And Corey? Corey was a bit of a rebel, Tony began. He was a songwriter and musician. Frankly, I think he traveled, drank too much, and partied because he wanted something to write about. He chuckled. But he was a kind soul. Forgetful most times, he often left his wallet or keys or something equally important and had to go back for it. I used to tell him he'd lose his head if it wasn't attached to him. Tony became sad. We lost his little sister when she was 4. I think that's why he watched over Bailey. Really? This caught my attention. He talked about Bailey? Sure, he always looked out for Bailey. Susanna nodded her head vigorously. Yes, on the nights she worked and wouldn't get home until midnight or 1 a.m., Corey always brought her home. I asked a few more questions of Susanna and Tony, and then thanking them, I left. I walked out of the library, pulling my hood up over my head. The wind had picked up, and there were snow flurries along with the decrease in temperature. I stopped in the parking lot and looked at the wonderful white hinterland that surrounded me. I took in a deep breath of the cool air and closed my eyes. In my mind, the final pieces snapped into place. The puzzle was done. I finally knew what happened that night at the Aspen Club.